Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you all to this Farsight intelligence briefing. We have a good turnout for right now, and I'm sure more people will come as we continue. And remember that the recording for this intelligence briefing will go up at farsightprime.com by either later tonight or tomorrow. So you're probably all wondering what's this about? Conversations with Harvey the ET. Okay. Well, most of you have probably seen the last mysteries project that we did, which is Farsight's Encounters of the ETs. Now, what happened was, last month in July, we took all the remote viewers except Aziz. Aziz couldn't come because, believe it or not, he was in quarantine in Japan. He got COVID, and he was in quarantine in Japan for a week and a half, and that's where he was. He's studying Japanese language there. He's also doing his sessions here. You'll see him regularly doing everything else, but he's also learning Japanese. He's fluent in Mandarin and Thai, and he's going to add Japanese to it. So anyway, that's where he was. That's why he wasn't at the retreat. But in July, we went down to the beach, and then we stayed there for a whole week. Everyone was there. Kamaya Yeme, who used to be princess, but now is going by Yeme, which is it's a nice name. And Intisam and Shantae and myself, we were all there. And what we were doing is we were going through a variety of different things. We went through our advanced meditation practices, and we're going to be hearing about that. We're going to have a release of our advanced meditation practices this month. And then we also went through a summary, summarizing, keeping everybody up to date on our telepathy procedures, which you're also going to get released this month. And then in the middle of the night, for a few times, we went down to the water's edge. And that was a big deal for us to get down to the water's edge. First, we had to wait for the clouds to clear and the rain to stop. Boy, it's been rainy on this side of the country. And so one of the rainiest Julys and Augusts I've ever seen, but July especially. And then we would set up our lights and cameras, and we'd go through some procedures. And some of the procedures are like our light up procedures, where we beam things out like light beams, but with our hands. And physically you can't see them, but the ETs can see them. And I'll explain a little bit about that, how that happens. And we did that, practiced, and we went out and got used to things, so we were comfortable in that environment. And then on the last night, it was Thursday, we went out at 3 in the morning. We waited for the clouds to clear, and I woke up at 3 in the morning. Everyone was sleeping in their sleeping bags or in their cars. And I opened my eyes at 3 in the morning, and I looked up, and there was the moon, and the skies were clear. And I got everybody. I was in my camper, but everybody else was in their tents. And we went out and got them all there, and everybody got dressed real quickly, and we went out there. A little after 3, we were all there, and we all set up our cameras, as you see in the encounters. And then we had the experience, which you see in the encounters. Now, I'm going to explain today a little bit more about why the encounters are the way they are. That's really important for you to understand. But anyway, we had something there. Now, that was something where the girls, the 4 female remote viewers, they were experiencing that, and it blew their socks off. It was, when the ETs actually showed up, boy, did they show up. And they didn't hold anything back. Anyway, the girls were a bit overwhelmed, and it was very interesting to see how the girls were interacting. But I was so busy with camera work and making sure everything was working okay and everything, I was sort of out of it. But it was really interesting to sort of see them like being pulled towards the water at the very end. It was like they were being gravitated and pulled to the water, and then they stopped at the water. A few of them went into the water a little bit, and then they had these very strong experiences. Anyway, so that was sort of that, and we wrapped it up. We came back, we put it on video and put it up, and the rest is history, and you can see what actually happened in that close encounters of the Farsight kind. So it's the way we do it. And then I went back in the first week of July, so I basically just got back. But I went back by myself in my camper, and I basically did the same thing. Now that's hard, because I have to carry an awful lot of stuff down to the water's edge and set it up. I have to carry lights and cameras and stuff. And I did it one night, like on a Tuesday, and I went through all the procedures and everything, and I had some experiences that I'm going to talk to you about. And then I did it again on a Thursday, and that was like over the top. And I'm going to be talking to you about that. Now, but before we talk about that, and that's what the Harvey, the ET is, I want to introduce the concept of where the title came from. Back in 1950, there was a movie that came out starring Jimmy Stewart called Harvey. And it was the play, he also played on Broadway, the same part. It was a play written by Mary Chase, and she wrote this play. It was a Pulitzer Prize winning play, where this fairy spirit, they call it, was sort of, if you look under what's called a puka, P-O-O-K-A, and Google it, you'll get the Wikipedia description. It's basically an Irish fairy spirit that's sort of mischievous, but anyway, this puka made itself visible to Jimmy Stewart, which is, he was playing the protagonist in the movie, and he made a friends with the guy, and he said it looks, and so he made, the puka, which is a fairy spirit, made itself into looking like a rabbit, but most everybody else couldn't see it, but Jimmy Stewart could see it. And then occasionally a couple other people would see it from time to time, but Jimmy Stewart saw it all the time. And that was the whole story. So people were thinking that Jimmy Stewart was crazy. He's playing the part of a character with a name, but he's the actor in it, so I'm just going to refer to him as Jimmy Stewart. He was the part is where people were looking at him like he had a lot of money, he inherited a lot of money, and people were looking at him like he was crazy. And then it slowly, over time, some people started to realize this puka was real. Now, the puka called itself Harvey. Now, actually, the original thing was Jimmy Stewart was talking with the guy and said, well, I'd like to give you a name. I'd like to know your name. What's your name? And the being said, well, what do you think my name is? What it should be? And he says, well, I always had a good feeling about the name Harvey. And then the puka said, well, that's great. That's my name then, Harvey. So that's how the name of the movie came about, Harvey, the puka. And then during the course of the movie, people were trying to, put him in a mental hospital, but then confusion was made, and the people who were trying to get him into the mental hospital ended up being in the mental hospital. And eventually the person who ran the mental hospital realized that Harvey was real. And anyway, then it ended up with Harvey and Jimmy Stewart having a good life together, and off they went in the end. And the people who were accusing him of being sort of crazy were realizing there was something there to it. It's a comedy, and it's a very funny movie. But anyway, the idea of talking to an invisible rabbit and having the conversation go on, and other people not believing that there was a rabbit, that sounded an awful lot like what we were doing with talking to extraterrestrials that other people couldn't see. So in the encounters that I'm going to be talking to you about, there was a particular extraterrestrial. He looked human, just like you and I, and he felt human, just like you and I. And in the conversations, and I'll describe the whole conversations, but in the conversations, I asked him if he'd mind being called Harvey. I don't know what his real name was. And he knew about the movie, and I told him about the movie, and I said, you'll be Harvey the puka. He thought it was hilarious. And so he said, sure, you can call me Harvey. So that's where Harvey came about. So this presentation, which you're going to say, now this intelligence briefing is not the presentation. The presentation where you actually see what happens and the conversations with Harvey, that's going to come out in a week. But the actual conversations themselves started with a dialogue with this guy, Harvey. Now, Harvey wasn't the only extraterrestrial that showed up. In fact, in the actual show that you're going to see when we actually release it in a week, there were tons of them. There were ETs all over, and all races. So we had people that looked, a lot of people looked just like you and me in uniforms and everything like that, but there were also little short grays, and they also had insectoids. It had everybody there, okay? The guys that looked like us, they had all types of clothes that I sort of thought were uniform-ish looking. Some of them were more casual clothing. Actually, it was all sort of formal clothing, but it was still uniforming. Sort of like a uniform. Anyway, so we had a conversation, and it was on 2 separate nights, on a Tuesday and a Thursday. I needed to take off on Wednesday night because I was just too exhausted. Engaging in these conversations is draining, and it's not easy to do. And I kept going until I burned out. And then they could tell when I'm sort of burning out, and they sort of say, okay, we'll wrap it up for today and we'll start it up again. But this is going to be a regular series, Conversations with Harvey. So this is not going to be the only one. And it's going to happen in a variety of locations and a lot of different activities. Sometimes when I'm riding my motorcycle, sometimes when I'm off in Africa. Once a month, you can see an update on Conversations with Harvey, and Harvey's going to say stuff. Now, let me explain, just let me take a minute. I was reading some of the comments on our forums, and some people say I shouldn't get into physics stuff, it's too new agey. It's not new agey. I'm a mathematician. When I'm talking about the physics stuff, it's for real. It's really it's not me engaging in new agey physics type of fluff language. I'm trying to explain how this works and why we don't see the extraterrestrials. And there's a reason. This is much more complicated than anything you've ever seen before. And it's much more serious, challenging, and dangerous than anything you've ever imagined before. Anything that you've heard out there is nothing compared to what's actually going on. And Harvey's explaining some of this. A lot of it that he was telling me is new. We recorded on radio, and when we recorded it on video, I was saying, what? I was telling him, this is new for me. And there's only one other thing I'll add before I sort of go into some of the physics of it, of how it can work, and then I'll go into more about what actually happened. Harvey was very patient with me. I'm a professor. I teach in a major university, and I talk too much. Believe me, I talk too much. I keep talking. And it's really hard for me just to shut up. Now, when you're engaged in this telepathic communication, you've got to open your mind up and let the other person's thoughts come in, and then I have to let the free-flowing ideas translate themselves into words, and I sort of lose it. It's sort of like I just go into a state where just his thoughts are coming in, and I'm putting them into words, and I'm explaining it. Now, I'm not channeling, and I'm not losing it. I'm still together. I'm still there, but the conveying, acting like a UN translator, it's sort of a draining process, and I can take it for only so long. Anyway, sometimes I sort of follow it, and then sometimes I just start talking, and I no longer am translating, but I'm just talking on myself. It's sort of, I blend out of it into myself, and he can tell right away when I'm doing that. What was so interesting was he was very patient. When he saw that happening, he just shut up, and he waited for me to rattle on for a little bit. By that time, I realized what was going on, and I was embarrassed. I refocused on him, then he would start talking again. But he was incredibly patient with me, which is really interesting. Okay, now let's do a little physics. Now look, you're going to go along with this. It'll be fine. It's not a big thing. It's going to be really great. So let me just use some of this fancy software I've got here. Okay, now just follow along, please, please, please. You need to understand why this is not new age, goofy stuff, why it's real, okay? All right, so what you should be seeing here is the visual spectrum. And what you're seeing now is that these are all the rays, all the frequencies that exist out there. Now, everything that we see is in the visible spectrum, which is that tiny sliver right in the center. Now, that tiny sliver that's right in the center is very narrow compared to everything else. Now, the physics that makes things visible to us is the exact same as the physics that makes things visible anywhere else in the electromagnetic spectrum. So the real question is, what is it that's creating physical stuff to appear? So one of the things you have to understand is, in our universe, no physicist has ever discovered anything solid. They say, okay, well, the physics of a mouse, that's a mouse is solid, and your phone is solid, and your car is solid, and the body is solid, but nothing. Once you dive into it, all you get is empty space and molecules, and inside that you get empty space and empty space in atoms, and inside that you get empty space in subatomic particles, and it goes down the rabbit hole. No physicist has ever discovered anything physical solid that can't be broken down. So we live in a frequency-based or an energy-based universe, and everything is just frequencies. And so, and waves and energy. So the only thing, and this is not just New Age fluff, this is real physics. So what happens is that when waves actually form, they interact with each other in processes known as constructive and destructive interference. All right, now let me go to the next slide and see if that shows up, and the audio at the same time. According to my screen, you're getting audio at the same time. All right, so what you're seeing here is frequencies. Now you have two types of frequencies. On the left-hand side, we have two waves at the bottom that are identical, meaning the peaks and the valleys are in the same locations. And then if you add them together, the peaks add to the other peaks for each line, and then the valleys add to the valleys, so you get a bigger single wave that you see on the top in the left. Now, if you go to the one on the right, where you see the two waves at the bottom, they're opposite, meaning the peak of one is at the valley of the other. You add those two together, and you get something called destructive interference, and that's where they cancel each other out. And you add them together, you get a flat line, and that's what a vacuum is in space. A vacuum is not nothing. A vacuum is filled with energy, frequencies, waves, but they're all in states of destructive interference. Whereas when you have the waves on the left, you have constructive interference. Okay, now, what I have here is an example where we have 10 different sine waves, and those are 10 frequencies, 10 different sine waves, and I just printed them up for you. Okay, now what happens when you add those 10 different sine waves happening over some spatial distance, x, when you add them together, you get this. So what you have now is those 10 waves added together. Now the frequencies that were close together had constructive interference happen, and you get a big thing. But off to the sides where the frequencies are farther apart, the waves are having destructive interference off on the wings. So that is called a destructive interference, and what you get is the flat on the sides. So this thing, which is a blip in the center, is called a superposition. Now physicists then take this superposition and they say, where these waves interact, that's where something is going to manifest, inside that blip. And then they want to look at saying, well, what's the probability of something manifest? So they square that wave and they normalize it, and they create something called a probability density function out of it, and they say the probability of something coming out of the collection of waves is going to be inside that thing. All right, so then what we have is that this process brought into an experimental level is something here we call the Two-Slit Experiment. At the very top, you see a photon source at the very top, and then there's a barrier that's small, and that photon source, light source, is emitting very little light. So one photon at a time gets out, and it gets through the top barrier in that single hole. And then it arrives at plate A, and plate A has two holes in it. And then that single photon has to go through one of those two holes. And then it goes through and hits plate B, and plate B is like a photographic source. They actually use electronics now, but it's, you can think of it as a photographic source, as a photographic plate. And then after the long, long time where they let photon after photon after photon go through, they develop the film, and there you get a banded pattern, which meant that something was interfering with the photons. But how can you have anything interfering with the photon if only one photon at a time was going through? So this is the pattern that was perplexing physicists for the longest time. And it was a guy called Hugh Everett who reinterpreted this and said, well, basically what that means is that there's multiple versions of each individual photon, and it's interfering with itself because a whole bunch of those versions are going through slits A and B. And you only get one actually manifesting on plate B, but in fact, before it manifested, you actually had a whole bunch of them. And so then there's a probability associated with what one is going to manifest. And somehow consciousness is involved in this because they found out that unless you register it in some way, either physically looking at it or register it to machinery or in some way, nothing actually happens on the quantum level. Einstein used to laugh at his quantum mechanical colleagues and say, "Are you telling me that the moon wouldn't exist if I didn't look at it?" And they said, "Well, that's what the quantum level stuff happens." And so originally the quantum people, the physicists said, okay, we're going to have a set of laws we're going to come up with, and we're going to say the law is everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So they said everything that happens in the quantum realm stays in the quantum realm, and then there's a line of decoherence, and everything that's on the other side is the macro level, and we'll use different laws for that. And then Hugh Everett came along, and Hugh Everett, he came along and said, "That's crazy. You can't just say that." Now, Hugh Everett got his PhD working under John Wheeler and in Princeton. And John Wheeler originally defended him as best he could, but he had some troubles. Anyway, that was in the late 1950s. And John Wheeler let Hugh Everett just be a free thinker, and Hugh Everett came up with the idea of other worlds, which is other realities, to explain the Two-Slit Experiment. And then mainstream physicists said, "That's crazy, you can't have other realities, we're only seeing one." And then Hugh Everett said, "No, just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist." And so basically what happened was Hugh Everett was laughed at tremendously, and he was so disgusted by the whole thing that he left mainstream physics, he left academia, and went into the Defense Department. And we are alive today because of that, because the Defense Department used him as a valuable creator of the MAD principle, which is MAD, which is mutually assured destruction, because believe it or not, there were civilian and military leaders who were arguing at that time for a first strike against the Soviet Union and China, and they were saying, look, we better get rid of them now, otherwise we'll have to deal with them later. And Hugh Everett came along and said, "Are you serious? Are you crazy? There's no such thing as a first strike. Everyone's going to die. No one's going to survive anything like that. There'll be no survivors at all. You're all dead. You're crazy. You can't do that." So he was the one who came up with the idea of mutually assured destruction, which is let the Soviets and let the Chinese and the Americans build all their nuclear weapons, let them point them at each other, but no one dare fire anything, because then everybody would be destroyed. So that's how we got this standoff where everyone built the weapons, but no one fired the weapons. And that was Hugh Everett's idea, and that's why we're existing today. Anyway, but Hugh Everett was eventually welcomed back into some talks that he gave at the University of Texas at Austin, some others. So he had his day back in the sun. And now about 20 to 25% of mainstream physicists, usually younger ones, have actually bought into the whole thing. And we're waiting for the older generation to retire and die off with this other world's interpretation of things. Okay, and we also found that this two-slit experiment type of thing actually works on the level of galaxies. So, I mean, it works on the level of any level whatsoever in terms of distance. So you can have a quasar on the other side of the galaxy sending out one photon at a time because it's so far apart, and that photon has to get through the gravity lens of the galaxy. And when you look at that single photon at a time on Earth and you collect photographs of it, you don't get a dot, you get a pattern. That means the photon was interfering with something. So, you get the photon interfering with multiple versions of itself, which is really interesting. And that means that's one of the reasons why they're exploring quantum computing, because with quantum computing, you can get a photon on one side of the galaxy interfering with a photon on another. That's instant communication at a distance. And if you did that with computing, you could get like really fast computers. So that's what they're sort of investigating on that level. But basically, the idea is that, okay, we're back now and the audio's still okay. Basically, the idea is that with a physics-based reality that's oriented around waves and frequencies, the only thing that is necessary for an extraterrestrial ship or a person to be invisible is to be slightly based on a frequency that's a little different from the visible light frequency. And there's no rule of cosmic justice or anything that says everything must appear only within the visible light spectrum. The reality is that everything in the whole universe is built upon waves, and the waves extend through the entire electromagnetic spectrum. So the entire electromagnetic spectrum is good for creating things. And so what happens is the ETs that you don't see actually can just be a nudge off the visible light spectrum, and that's why you don't see them. Now, with remote viewing, when we do remote viewing, we train people so that they can detect these things in their minds that are slightly off the visible light spectrum. And that includes the past and the future and other versions of the present. And that also means the ETs. So what happens is, you're looking at me, hopefully if you haven't left, for those of you who lived through the audio problems we had, looks like most of you are back. But when you're looking at me on the screen, you're looking at me and getting a bright image. It's going through your eyes, onto the retina, and then you're having that image of myself going into your brain and being positioned onto, you can sort of say it's like a screen in the brain, but it's actually a layer of cells in the brain, and they've actually mapped where those visual images get placed inside the brain. Now, while you're looking at me, imagine something else. A pen. You see this pen? This is a good thing, this pen. So imagine this pen, but don't look at this pen that I'm showing you here. Imagine one out of your own, in your own mind, the memory of that pen, and put it right in front of the image that you see of me. Now notice that pen, notice that you can see through it a bit. It's sort of translucent, it's not as bright, because you're using your imagination to bring the memory of that pen into the mind's eye, and you're putting it in front of the visual image. Well, a remote viewing image is actually dimmer, foggier, fuzzier than that. And what that is when we had images where the frequencies were slightly off. I'm going to bring back a slide now. Okay? When you had images where the frequencies were slightly off, if you look at the waves on the wings of this particular image, notice that it's sort of flat, but there is still a residual bump going all the way to the left and all the way to the right. And that residual bump is minor, but the big bumps in the center are big. Well, in the visual spectrum where we live, we're in the big bumps in the center. But off to the left and off to the right that looks sort of flat, there are still, our waves are still interacting with those other waves that are a little bit farther off. And so what happens is, we still pick up the impressions of those other elements that are off to the sides, but they're not in the visual spectrum. But it doesn't come through strong like anything that's right with waves that are right near ours. And that's why remote viewing works. The remote viewers are trained to pick up these vaguer, foggy, fuzzier images. They're foggier and fuzzier than the visual images and the remembered images. And what they do after long training, they get good at that until they finally really focus on that. So what happens is, when we went out into the retreat area, the beach area, the remote viewers took their skill set for being able to focus on those residual images that they get when they do remote viewing with them in the beach when they're on the sand in the middle of the night. And that's where those images came from, and that's why they were able to see the extraterrestrials that were there. And so what happened was, with myself, when I went back to the same beach in August, first week in August, I went there and I set up all my camera equipment and so on, and with the intent that I was going to interact with whoever was there, using the same skill set of remote viewing that I've developed over the years, for a very great many years. I've gotten used to this. I mean, I meditate 2.5 hours a day to calm my mind, these perceptual stuff, and I've gone through a long time of practice with these remote viewing procedures, so under verifiable conditions where you have to get it right. So I'm used to what it feels like and what it looks like, and so my mind automatically just shifts over to that vaguer, fuzzier, foggy or fuzzier side of these perceptions that just locks on and becomes pretty clear afterwards. It's still sort of semi-transparent, but it's still pretty clear to me. All right, so I went there with that skill set, and I set up all the cameras, and I sat and I sort of stood there on one side, and I had a spot there for someone that was going to show up, if they were going to show up. And sure enough, somebody literally walked right there and stood there. So I was standing right next to somebody else. Now, if you were looking at it, you would have said, There's nobody there. That's why it's like Harvey, the puka. Other people can't see it, but Jimmy Stewart, he could see it. So that's where I had the conversation with this ET guy. I said, do you mind if we call you Harvey? And he said he liked that. He knew all about the movie Harvey, and he knew about the Jimmy Stewart thing and Mary Chase's screenplay. And so he thought that was a great, and he chuckled. He thought it was tremendously funny for him to be called Harvey. That's not his real name, and he certainly is not a puka, and he certainly does not look like a rabbit. He looks like a person, just like me and you. He has sort of what I thought was like a uniform type thing, sort of a vest type of a thing on. May have just been his formal wear, but he looked nice. And in addition, there was a ton of people behind me, a ton, and as I mentioned earlier, and they were in like rows, but they were behind me, like a huge number. There were some in front also, but most of them were behind me. Now, why did we do it at the beach? Now, you can sort of say, some people have mentioned it in the comments. Wait a second, now someone is saying audio is out. How can you say audio is out? Can everyone, my thing says audio is okay. Can someone tell me if you're still hearing me? Audio is fine. Audio is good. All right. Okay. So the question was been raised in the forums, like going to the beach was sort of ridiculous. No, it's not ridiculous. Two things has to happen. First of all, I have to have my own mental space to be able to do this without being worried about the studio environment, the machines here, and I have to get myself into an alternate mental space. And secondly, it had to be a space where there's lots of area. There's not too much room in the studio. It had to be a space where there was lots of space for whatever to happen. Also, it had to be total solitude. And I had to get myself into a space of feeling like I was alone out there in the universe all by myself. And so that's one thing. And another thing is that the ETs were going to show up. I wanted them to be free to show and do whatever they wanted. If they wanted to show physical ships, then they could do that, but also if they wanted to show up in larger numbers, there was space for them. So at the water's edge, at the beach, there was a lot of room, and I felt like it was good for me, and they felt comfortable also, especially in the middle of the night when absolutely nobody was on the beach. That beach was, except for the moon, that beach was real dark. And so that's why we went to the beach. It helps me, and when we went a couple of weeks before, actually the month before with the other remote viewers, it helped them as well, getting into that state where they're all by themselves and you sort of see the stars above you, you expanding to the universe, and it was helpful. All right, so there I was, and I was having the conversation with the ET guy who, and I could clearly feel him, perceive him, I could physically see him because we're used to doing that because we see what you would consider to be the vague, foggy, fuzzy images, but we see them and they're not so vague and foggy anymore, but they are translucent in our eye, in our mind's eye. And he was standing right next to me. I could tell that he was, what gender he was, sort of what he looks like, and I could also tell what kind of clothing he wore. He was about my height also. And I could also tell that there were a lot of beings behind me. All right, so that was a perfect thing. And then, so I then sort of said, okay, and we came to an agreement with what we'd call him, Harvey. He thought that was a hilarious idea to call him Harvey because of Mary Chase's play. At one point I asked him, the play was so perfect, were they responsible for feeding that into Mary Chase to create that movie, that play? And he sort of suggested with a wink that maybe. So if you haven't seen it, Harvey, starring Jimmy Stewart, I really strongly recommend you to see it. Anyway, so what happened was we had a conversation and he started to talk. I opened the floor. I said, rather than me just asking questions, I had a bunch of questions I wanted to ask, but he wanted to start it. And so he started. Now, telepathic communications are such as I was mentioning earlier, where you sort of just let your mind merge with that person's mind, and then it's not channeling and you're not losing it. I was totally in control, but I was acting like a UN translator to translate, and it's like a flow to it. It's not like I'm really hard thinking. but there's a flow to it where the thoughts get translated to words, and then I was saying the words as he was thinking the thoughts, and it just went on and on and on like that. And then he explained what he was doing and what everybody else was doing, and he said a whole bunch of stuff, and then the people behind me also started to chime in later when some things were not being said quite right. They were like, for example, there was one point where I sort of mentally had the idea of me being special, and boy, did they come down with a ton of bricks. No, it's not, you're special, you're just like everybody else. They were there for a reason, and it was for everybody. And then they also explained in ways that I had never heard anyone on the planet Earth explain, and I had never thought about it, why these so-called good extraterrestrials are here, and why they don't just come in and just knock out the bad extraterrestrials and free everybody. They explained the whole process of why they're here and why it's so difficult. And they also explained the process by why they don't do the frequency shifting and become physically visible. They did agree with me, and they did understand that if they did do that, no one would take it seriously. They have to get to the point where humans actually meet them. Humans actually come out and meet them at their level. They can't dumb themselves down, because the idea of saying, no, I won't talk to you or interact unless you become a physical person and stand right in front of me. They're just not going to do that, because that's part of the prison system. They fully bought into the prison system idea. They fully bought into that. They're explaining the whole reason for why that is and why it's such a delicate operation to free everybody. It's not at all easy. And they explained all of that, and all of that is in the show that you're going to be seeing called Conversations with Harvey. It's actually a series, but it's going to be the first part of it is coming out in a week. So the Harvey was actually discussing a lot about, why he was there, why they were doing what they were doing. Then I started to ask some questions, and he started to answer some of the questions. He was very free and very open. In terms of the emotional feel of both the people behind me, various races, a lot of people that were just humans like us, but also insectoids and also greys and things there. The whole panoply, everybody was there. Some reptilians where I suppose I didn't particularly focus on any reptilians, but I'm assuming there were some. Not all reptilians are bad. Apparently there's a rebel force of reptilians. I don't know if any of them were there, but there's few, very few, that are on the good side. We're now starting to understand why this actually has turned out the way it is. It's really more complicated than anything, but you're going to have to wait a few months to get another few projects down the pike for us to fully explain stuff. But anyway, what really struck me was how human everybody was in their emotions. They were really just like you or me. It wasn't like they were from another universe. They were from another place. It was, their emotions felt just like you or I would feel. It was really an uncanny experience. And the other thing that I want to emphasize here is why they were here. When I sort of had the thought that maybe I was a little special, and they came really down on me hard with that one, they answered the question of why they were here in the first place. Now, so many people in the New Age community say things like, we're waiting for us to be ready, humans to be ready for contact, waiting for contact. All that's being done by beings that are being channeled into other people that are working for the other side, because there's nobody waiting for contact. It's not like we're a primitive society and we're trying to mature to be able to that's not going on. That's not what's going on at all. What's going on is that there is a phenomenon that occurred throughout the entire galaxy of war and conflict. And a lot of people were caught up in the authoritarian regimes that were out there, and they were thrown into this place as a prison to stay for a long while. And the ETs explained it for the first time. I never understood it before, but Harvey explained to me why this prison is so important to the oppressive side. So they were thrown in here. Well, they were taken from their relatives and friends all over the galaxy and dumped here. And those are the people who are in the rescue side. Those are the ETs that are actually here in ships trying to help humanity. They're your family. They're your friends. This is a rescue effort to get their own relatives out of this prison, and the prison it's got billions of people in it, and so the ET forces that are here are huge because the number of friends and relatives and comrades that are here are huge in number, and the process of getting them out is really, really difficult. Now, some people have said in the forums, why don't you just blow the whole place up, kill everybody, and everybody's free, and that ends the whole Earth prison system. And they said, that can't happen, no, because the death traps idea is a very real thing, that this whole Earth process of soul recycling system, it's a very real aspect of this. And so, in fact, I think David Icke, I don't know, I've never met David Icke, but I understand next month in September he's coming out with a book focusing just on this called The Trap. Anyway, but apparently this idea is becoming better understood with this whole sort of process. And they said if they just came in here and blew up the whole planet and that's the end of it, everybody would be caught up in the so-called death traps, the recycling system, the soul recycling system, the ISBs would just be re-caught up and reprocessed, and they'd lose everybody once again. So just killing everybody on the planet, destroying the planet, wouldn't free anybody. And they're here to try to actually get their family and friends and relatives out of this place. So destroying the place won't free anybody because of the so-called death traps that are surrounding the place. And apparently this is technology that's widespread throughout the galaxy. And you see the same thing in authoritarian regimes on Earth. Authoritarian regimes on Earth try to keep people inside the borders. They try to keep information. Look at authoritarian regimes, the former, the old version of China when it was a strict communist totalitarian society, the old version of the Soviet Union under the Stalinist days, and later Lenin, then later Stalinist days. And then afterwards, even all the way through up until the Soviet Union broke up, it was information control. Don't let information in. Stop information from getting in, and don't let people get out. People couldn't get out of the former Soviet Union. They put up borders. People in the old days couldn't get out of China, and there were authoritarian systems try to contain everybody, keep everybody, their entire population, under lock and key, because they know very well that the place would empty out. People would leave because no one likes to be under an authoritarian boot. People would like to leave, and so they stop that from happening. Well, on a galactic level, that happens. And the old process of dying as a means of transportation to get out, they had to stop that. So they developed, given millions of years, they developed technology that could do that, could trap people. So the basic idea is that we've done all of our investigations seem to point to the same thing. And interestingly, David Icke actually talks about this. I don't know anything. I don't follow David Icke. He may be a very nice guy. He's got some very interesting ideas on this particular topic. I saw YouTube. No, it wasn't a YouTube. It was a BitChute interview with him, and apparently it's to his book that's come out. And the ideas that he had were very much along these lines, and and the basic idea is that the same thing that we sort of found, which is when you die, you see the light, and you're sort of expected to see the light, and that's all part of the sort of soul recycling system, where you're attracted to the light, like a moth is attracted to the light. And then the closer you get to it, the more you're unable to escape from it, like a sticky trap. And then you get processed, you get exposed to extremely high-powered, like lightning bolts. And what it basically does, you can't kill an ISB. Everyone here is an ISB. That's a person who is for the purpose of being, no other reason. You can't kill an ISB, but you can trap it, you can control it, you can confuse it. And you expose it to high enough power, electromagnetic electricity, like lightning bolt shocks, you can rattle it, and it loses its memory and temporarily can't figure things out. And then you can feed it information and give it a story that it buys into. So the whole idea of meeting the council of elders and then having the council come to you and say, there's some lessons in life you still have to learn. We think you should go back and learned those lessons. That's all bull. That's all process. That's all part of the Earth recycling system. You've all been alive for millions, if not billions of years. There's nothing you have to go back and learn for. What are you going to learn in another lifetime here that you haven't learned over the last few million years? The point is, it's a trap. It's a system here. It's a prison. And what happens is you get just sort of convinced to go back in, so you voluntarily go back in. There are no elders that are meeting with you. It's all, in fact, it's probably all done by AI. It's probably not even real ISBs that are talking to you. And the whole trapping society, the whole trapping issue, and the whole confusion issue, and the whole elders issue, and the old, explanation that you have to go back to learn more lessons, it's probably all automated. And so the basic idea is that the ETs that I was interacting with were explaining that system has not been taken apart. It still exists. And they didn't really know how to get rid of it. And it's not just isolated to this planet. It exists widespread throughout the galaxy. These traps are all over the place. And so they were explaining that the only way to stop it, the only way to really stop it, is to have it from the inside. You have to have people on the inside working against it. You have to have the wake up of the planet. And they were basically saying that you can't, that the control systems have been worked out through millions of years. And, if you look at a human prison, they're very careful of how they put the alarms in, how they put the bars in, how they build the thing, how they build the prison. Well, add millions and millions of years do it. They have refined prisons a lot. So it's extremely well constructed to be able to contain a large population that goes into the many billions. And so that process of creating this prison makes it extremely difficult to take it apart, and it's very much an intensive indoctrination process to get the prisoners to be willing participants in their own imprisonment. And the ETs at the meeting, Harvey was explaining that the only way to end the whole thing and for them to be able to rescue their family, friends, and relatives is to have the participation of the prisoners themselves in the process. Meaning that it's impossible for the ETs to come in and do it from the outside. And they gave a whole bunch of reasons for why it's impossible for them just to invade, conquer, free everybody. They explained it in the meeting why that just cannot work. And so the only process, it's a very delicate operation, and the only process that can work is where the prisoners themselves have to wake up. That's why this disclosure thing is so important. The disclosure isn't just freedom because we want to be able to know things and it's good to be free, then you feel free. No, that's not what it's all about. The disclosure process is the only way the prison system can end. And you can't rely on any politician, you can't rely on anybody out there, because all of the major centers of power have all been compromised because the prison system is so well developed, the authorities know exactly how to manipulate the people in charge. So it's an extremely delicate operation. And if it was broken up into open conflict, the oppressors wouldn't mind it at all because they would win. If you have open conflict, then the planet would be destroyed. The oppressors would come out, the good ETs would come out, everybody would shoot everybody, the whole planet would blow up, that would be the end of everything. And then all the souls get caught up into the soul recycler system, and the oppressors have everybody once again. So it cannot be done through force. So that's what the ETs were explaining. That's what Harvey was explaining to me. And so that was sort of the summary of what happened. And it happened at night, and it was all recorded. We got good audio. And there were a lot of bugs the second night. I don't know why there were so many bugs, but the lights that we had for the video were the only lights on the beach, and so these bugs. So I was trying to keep the bugs away at the same time. Harvey and the other ETs didn't seem to mind at all. I guess that's one of the good points about being a couple, a little bit of frequency off to the side. All right, now the other thing is at the end, after it was all done, Thursday night, they were closing up because they realized on both Tuesday and Thursday night that I was burning out. And when I started to burn out, Harvey said, okay, I think it's time for us to close down, and don't worry about it. We'll have many discussions like this. We'll have many encounters like this, and it'll be a series. We'll keep on going. But at that point, they came forward, and that was amazing, folks. You got to see it on the actual video. They actually came forward. They were like rows and rows and rows behind me. I don't know how many there were, but there was like so many. They came right up to me and surrounded me like I was a guest of honor. And they all came up and they wanted to get close to me, almost like shake my hand. They couldn't shake my hand, of course, but I did give Harvey a fist bump. But the point is, they just came around and they just like surrounded me, as if you had someone giving a talk, and then after the talk, everybody just comes up to the person and talks to them and says, so grateful that you came and stuff. But it was like that, and they were like so emotional, so like appreciative that we were going through this effort. And that means they were so appreciative of you folks for listening to this thing. And even when we had some audio problems, you stuck with me. A good 550 some of you just stayed with me through the, 10 or 15 minutes of audio problems. Then we came back, we fixed it. But you are the reason this thing is working. But you've got to see it when it comes out in about a week. And I'm going to tell you what also we're going to come out with this month also. But they were explaining why this process of talking this stuff over is so important. They explained it, and for the first time I understood it. I never understood it before. Harvey made it clear. These are our friends and relatives. These are our comrades. These are people that have, and they were in those other planets and other societies when we were taken and taken from them. And it took them a long time to organize their efforts to be able to get here to try to organize a rescue. And this is the only process that's known, that they know of how to do it, to get us to participate in the whole process. Well, I know there's a lot more questions to be asked about this, and you're going to be asking those same questions, and Harvey's going to be talking about them as the months go on. Basically, once a month, there's going to be a new episode of Conversations with Harvey. And Harvey will be talking with me and whoever else that shows up, but it's mostly going to be Harvey, the puka. Again, he's not a puka. He knows quite well he's not an invisible rabbit, but nonetheless, it's a pun on the Mary Chase's play, Harvey. And so that's what we're going to be doing. And that's what it was like. So in about a week, you're going to actually see the recording and my direct translations of exactly what Harvey was saying. Just understand that Harvey was the one talking to me, and the other extraterrestrials were behind me, but I was translating. I was like a UN translator. I was not channeling. I did not lose myself. I was there 100%. I was in control of my own mental facilities, but that's how telepathy works. And again, I want to remind you what we're going to be coming out with again this month. This month, we're going to be coming out with not just Conversations with Harvey, episode 1, but we're also going to be coming out with our advanced meditation procedures, and we're going to be coming out with our telepathy procedures, a video on that as well. The advanced meditation procedures are really important because it's like exercise at the gym. You have to, in order to do the big competition at the Olympics, you got to work muscles and everything. I was just telling a friend of mine just the other day that when I came back, I went down at the beach during the day. I was surfing. I love surfing. But, during the normal day, during the year, I jog a little over 4 miles. It takes me 30 minutes, 6.28 kilometers or something. But the point is I jog every other day. And I do various types of different push-ups to get the chest muscles and everything going. But those are like, when you're jogging, the legs are going forward and backward, forward and backward, forward and backward. And there's the same process, the same muscles, groups of muscles you're using. And then when you do push-ups, you're doing the same thing. You're using the same type of muscles, biceps, triceps, back muscles, whatever. But when you're surfing, it's like all the muscles get used, because what you're out there and you're being hit by water. You're being pushed, you're taking a wave, you get into the wave, then the wave knocks you down, and you have to pick your surfboard up, you have to pick yourself up, and another wave knocks you down in the process. So you're being pushed with all this lateral pressures back and forth, and you're laughing at the same time, and you're using muscles all over. And after 3 days of surfing, and that was approximately 12 hours of surfing over 3 days, I was sore. I mean, my muscles were sore, and I just went into my camper and took a long nap, and I took a nap, and anyway, but the meditation procedures are like that. They're the procedures to help you. They're specifically designed for the remote viewing process, to enhance the remote viewing process. It's like exercising the muscles that you need to be able to do the remote viewing process. And so we're going to be talking about the advanced meditation practices that we do. It's always starting with our first 20 minutes of regular meditation, but then we go on into our advanced procedures where we exercise those particular muscles for doing this type of thing. So you have to understand, when we are interacting with the extraterrestrials, get this, folks, I could show you any picture, any video, whatever, you'd say it was all Photoshop or done in Premiere with special effects. No one would believe anything visual. But if we explain how we do the remote viewing, and we explain the interactions that we were having and why they were having, there will be a sense of authenticity that will come across it. We're obviously not trying to trick anybody, because we're not trying to use Photoshop for an image, but at the same time, we're explaining what's actually happening and what they're telling us. So you're able to value the information that we're giving at face value. How does it sound to you? The logic of it will be the persuasive aspect. It's not a photograph that can be photoshopped, but it's the logic of what we're saying, and it will all fit together. Well, a lot of it starts now in a week. Now, there's one thing I want to talk to you about with regard to the camera work. I'm out there by myself when I went there this time, and I didn't have anybody doing the camera work. We didn't have a crew. And so I have one camera to one side, another camera to the other side. It would have been nice to have one of the cameras to the side, sort of in front, and was close up, but I couldn't do really close up stuff because it's hard to see the LCD screen from far away, and I was always afraid I might move slightly and then move off camera. So we had to use sort of a wide angle sort of setting, but we're using 4K cameras, so I can still zoom in quite a bit and still remain sharp. But in future stuff, we're going to try to get things a little bit closer, zoomed in, but it's challenging when you're both doing the stuff on camera and operating the camera systems itself at the same time. And then I have to also worry about everything else, like batteries and camera positioning and light positioning at the same time. And then it's sort of weird because you have a space for Harvey to stand and no one can see Harvey, but I'm actually talking to this invisible puka. So you're talking to this invisible extraterrestrial, and you're having a space, but you don't see anybody. So it's just like in the movie Harvey with Jimmy Stewart. He would go up to somebody and said, "And hey, I'd like to introduce you to a very close friend of mine," and he'd point to this empty space. "This is my very close friend Harvey," and the person would look and doesn't see anyone. Well, it's a little bit like that with our camera work. There's a space for Harvey, and I know Harvey's there, in that spot, but you may not be able to see him, but nonetheless, he's there. I had the lights shining as if you could see him, but you get the idea. So it's a bit like Mary Chase's play. If you haven't seen Harvey with by the stage play of Mary Chase, you can rent it on YouTube. I'd really recommend seeing it. Or if you have a streaming service that has access to it, it's a great one. And that's where the Conversations with Harvey came up with the name. So anyway, that's basically it. I think I've been talking it's been talking for an hour and 20 minutes, but I think the 20 minutes extra was the time I'm going to be chopping out because the audio went away. So that was really great. Now we have over 800 people here, so it's been a great turnout. I want to thank you so much for being here. You're the best. You are the reason we're here. And it may seem like we have a few tens of thousands of YouTube subscribers, and we have our video streaming service, farsightprime.com. However, the time is coming when the audience is going to be going from tens of thousands to tens of millions to perhaps over 1 billion. because this is what the reality, our reality is. The stuff you get from mainstream, the news and physics, just doesn't make sense. So we're going to win this battle, but I'm not in control of the timing of it, but I know it's going to happen. And when it does happen, you're helping us set the stage for it by watching everything we do and then talking about it in our forums, both the forums below our YouTube stuff, but our forums also in the farsightprime.com. And censorship is going to become an issue increasingly. And I guess if you notice, a lot of the stuff that's on YouTube now has changed over the years. It used to be that YouTube was a source for people with alternative points of view. But now if you look at YouTube, and I'm not criticizing YouTube, I think YouTube is great, but if you look at it now, it's primarily animal videos, makeup tutorial videos, comedy things. It's, in the old days, YouTube became the alternative to cable, because cable was sort of just mainstream pablum stuff. And then YouTube was the alternative place to get different type of edgy stuff. And now it's become cable sort of out of business, or almost out of business, and then YouTube has become the new version of cable in a sense, with the sort of stuff that's not really edgy anymore. So farsightprime.com is absolutely necessary for us to put our real content on. So I want to thank you all for helping us with farsightprime.com. For all of you who are subscribers to farsightprime.com, you really are making the future possible. And for those of you who watch us on YouTube, we'll keep having our human news program up on YouTube as long as we can. And also I want to say that this particular video is going to come down later on tonight, and then we edit it. So we take the recording that we're making of it now, we edit it, we make sure the sound is perfect. That spot where the sound went silent, that gets clipped out, for example. And then we put it back up on farsightprime.com, and a trailer, the initial part of it, gets put up on YouTube. So that's all going to happen either later tonight or tomorrow. All right, everybody? So I want you to all know that I love you all. You're special, every single one of you. And there's also a special person out there. I'm winking it. All right? All right. So listen, guys, you're the best. And without you, none of this would be possible. So I see you in the next intelligence briefing, but please wait. You've got to see this stuff that's coming out in a week. Conversations with Harvey. They put a lot of effort into this thing. It wasn't just me going out to the beach, carrying all the camera equipment. They put a lot of effort. A lot of them showed up. It was a big effort for them to assemble so many people. And their motions, because they knew they were having a chance to reach you, their emotions of being able to get to that, it was huge. You guys are their relatives, family, and friends. They were so appreciative of this connection that we're starting to make. So, may the connection grow to beyond thousands, to the millions and billions as we proceed. You're the best. See you soon.